A philosophy professor stood before his class with some items on his desk. When the class began, he picked up a large, empty glass jar and proceeded to fill it with golf balls. He then asked the students if the jar was full. The students agreed that it was. The professor then picked up a box of pebbles and poured them into the jar. He shook the jar lightly, and the pebbles rolled into the open spaces between the golf balls. He asked the students again if the jar was full. They laughed and nodded, agreeing that now the jar was indeed full. Next, the professor picked up a box of sand and poured it into the jar. Of course, the sand filled up the remaining space between the golf balls and the pebbles. He asked once more if the jar was full. The students responded with a unanimous yes. Finally, the professor produced 2 cups of coffee from under the table and poured the contents into the jar, effectively filling the small gaps between the grains of sand. The students laughed. When the laughter subsided, the professor spoke. This jar represents your life. The golf balls are the most important things. Your family, your health, your friends, and your passions. Things that, if everything else were lost and only they remained, your life would still be full. The pebbles are the other things that matter, like your job, your house, and your car. The sand is everything else, the small stuff. If you put the sand into the jar first, there is no room for the pebbles or the golf balls. The same goes for life. If you spend all your time and energy on the small stuff, you will never have room for the things that are truly important. The professor then paused, letting the lesson sink in. One of the students raised their hand and asked, "What does the coffee represent?" The professor smiled. "I'm glad you asked. The coffee just shows you that no matter how full your life may seem, there's always room for a cup of coffee with a friend." The story of the empty jar is a powerful metaphor for prioritizing our time and energy. Our lives, like the jar, have limited space, and what we fill it with determines our happiness. The golf balls represent what matters most: family, health, love, and passions, while the pebbles and sand are the secondary things that can overwhelm us. It's easy to fill our days with the sand. Trivial matters that seem urgent but are unimportant. Emails, social media, and minor inconveniences can take up space, leaving little room for what truly matters. By prioritizing our relationships, well-being, and passions, we can avoid losing what makes life meaningful. Starting with the right priorities, the golf balls lets everything else find its place. Pebbles, like work, are important but should fit around what we value most. Life isn't about eliminating the small things, but ensuring they don't overshadow what's important. The coffee is a reminder to always make time for simple pleasures and the people who bring us joy. The empty jar encourages us to reflect on our priorities, ensuring our lives are filled with true happiness and purpose, and always leaving room for what makes us smile.